Hi, I'm Sarah from The Upcoming. A real pleasure to have you here with us in beautiful, beautiful Marrakech. Maybe we could begin with a brief introduction to your film. For people who haven't seen it yet, what can they expect?
Yeah, so the film The Wolves Always Come at Night, it's a hybrid documentary, so it's somewhere between documentary and fiction. And it's set in rural Mongolia. The two main protagonists, Jaava and Zia, are a herding couple. They live nomadically in the Gobi Desert. One very fateful day, a huge dust storm hits their camp, and they're forced to relocate to the city. But the story really is about what happens after they're forced to kind of move from everything they know. And Dava starts experiencing this kind of haunting. It's a feeling of not being able to forget where they've come from, and in a way trying to see how they create a new identity, a new way forward. So the film really is that feeling of loss and of grief, and of also haunting as a kind of remembrance, and not being able to forget.
Can you tell us a bit about the genesis of the project? What drew you to this region? Why did you want to share something about their way of life there? And why was the story really important to you to tell?
It was honestly a kind of film, a kind of story that arrived to me rather than me arriving to it. So, you know, I had lived in Mongolia as a 20-year-old, and for a couple of years, and I spent a lot of that time traveling the countryside and living with nomadic families. And when I was revisiting Mongolia over the years to visit friends and colleagues, I was going to visit some of the families and finding that they weren't in the countryside, they'd relocated to the city. And in these meetings, these encounters, there was this thread through all of the conversations, and it was just this feeling of a particular kind of grief, like a particular kind of loss and disconnect, it not being in this place that had been for so far back. Every family member, every part of their identity was there. And so in this new liminal space, there was this sense of kind of loss and confusion. And, you know, I started having conversations with the producer, Ariona, and, you know, about these experiences, and her feeling or her impression was, yeah, I mean, we're inside of this phenomenon, you know, in a way we don't see it because it's so frontal, it's so part of our everyday life, this huge shift that Mongolians are undergoing, which is from nomadic lifestyle to a more urban way of life. So we started talking about what would it look like if we came together to create a film that was an inside perspective and an outside perspective, if we kind of brought together these two gazes. And that was where the origin of the film, you know, came from, was this very personal experience of me, you know, traveling and having this new impression, but also this intention of how can we create a way that's not, you know, exploitative or expositional, but at the same time isn't sanitized, or, you know, to still create a kind of space where there is the mess of cinema, but also with a new set of you know, ethics and ways that we work. So it was with these two ideas that we moved forward with the film.
And obviously you've got Jaava and Zia as co-writers. What was that collaboration like? And as you're kind of explaining there, how did that help sort of bring that kind of authenticity rather than sort of, you know, the outward gaze, you know, looking in? You're sort of telling a story from within.
Somebody kind of asked that before, actually, in an interview, you know, when was the moment you set out to kind of do a film about climate change? And that just wasn't the process of the film. You know, the process was these very internal experiences from the inside out. You know, there was no other way of making this film. I mean, this was something we really worked against, because I think particularly in Mongolia, there's been such a legacy of Western filmmakers arriving and feeling an impression and creating that impression. And, you know, there's been a real legacy of that extracted way of working. And again, we were so conscious of that and so aware of it. And at every step, it was like, can this even be a film? Like, should this even happen? Should I be directing this? This was always the question. We went with such tentative ways. But the moment I think that everything kind of shifted for me was, of course, the moment we met Jaava and Zia. You know, we sat down, and within about 30 seconds, it was absolutely clear that we weren't interviewing them, they were interviewing us. Mm-hmm. And there was this sense of, how are you going to do this? How are you going to make our story? How is it going to be that people care? You know, because Jaava, he really had this air of someone who was a witness to something, you know, the watchman of something coming in, and no one's listening. And so I think, in a way, it felt like they had been waiting or consciously thinking of how do we make it known, but how do people come into this experience that we've just had? And so, yeah, in this dialogue, it became clear, okay, this might work if we're co-writers, so in a way, we're dancing between these two ideas, these two processes. I have ideas, they have ideas, we put it into this melting pot, we see where it takes us. It is the only way that the film could have been made, and it gave space to a really fascinating process. I think there's this idea that filmmakers need to create setups to shock characters, and then you get this very authentic reaction, particularly in documentary. But in my experience, it's just not true. The more people know, the more safe they feel. And so in that space, then, well, you can go to really deep and profound corners, because it's not about this sanitized, we all feel good. No, it's hard. You're going to really, difficult moments and deep moments. But the more that you're in conversation with someone about it, the more they're part of that, the more safety there is, rather than this idea of shocking or withholding information or that I know more, So it was about disbanding a lot of these ideas that, have been really present in documentary filmmaking, I think, for a long time.
And of course, the Gobi Desert, in a sense, is a character in and of itself. You're really there. It feels so immersive.
Yeah.
I mean, what was it like shooting there? It can't have been free from its challenges, but the fact that it is so visceral, the way you captured it, is crucial to the film.
Yeah, it really was. And this is the thing, somebody was like, so, but is the storm a reconstruction? It's like, you cannot reconstruct a storm. I'm not God. We have a documentary budget. It's like, you cannot reconstruct a storm. So much of this was serendipity and at the same time responding to what was going on. This was the scripting process, was what is going on in this part of the world, in this nature at this moment. And then we respond and we kind of start to script ideas around that. So we were in it, we lived in a ger next to Jaava and Zia and their family. So we'd constructed a ger to live there. So, it was, what's the next word beyond immersive? We were, of course, we were inside of it. We were like living this at the same time as they were. So in a way that meant that we were also part of the daily rhythms. We were inside of the sandstorms. We were at the whim of whatever nature was going to hand to us in that time that we were there. And in a way this kind of was the tapestry or the feeling inside the film. It is a documentary really at its heart, because we really were just responding to whatever was emerging in that time. And in that was this huge sandstorm that there'd been nothing like it in over, a decade.
So the hybrid form, would you say that is something that has just kind of come about organically, or were there other films or filmmakers who you've seen kind of achieve that, or who kind of, carving your own path in a sense, because this is how the material was lending itself to the story?
I think a bit of both. There's so many filmmakers that work in this space that are incredibly inspiring. Roberto Minevetti is a filmmaker that I love. It was interesting, I saw his last film at Toronto. It was like the first fiction, but that line is it's hard to know when you cross the line from one to the other. And my next film will be a fiction, and I'm curious to see what is that cross from one line to the other, because I think for me, a film is a film. I don't care if it's fiction or documentary, but I know for a lot of people that distinction is important because of the context of the world at the moment, this idea of truth. But I think in my first film, which is also a hybrid film, it was like a double barrel. At the same time, we were needing to create hybridity because we couldn't film with people in the experience they were in. They were in a high, detention facility, high security detention facility, and we weren't able to be in touch with them. So it was an element of creating security. And at the same time, it gave us a lot of creative scope. It was two things, and the same with Wolves. On one hand, we were responding to what was happening. So meeting Jaava and Zia, this experience that changed their whole life had just recently happened. And there's no way that we would want to go out into the middle of the Mongolian countryside, wait for somebody to lose their animals, scoop in, and, this was the opposite of what we would want to do. But how do we create a space afterwards to film in retrospect that at the same time is letting real life unfold? Most of that is really observational documentary moments. And then at the same time, it gave us huge scope cinematically to, talk about lighting and sound, with more care and more time to create this more cinematic gaze. So for me, this hybridity, it does both things. It allows for us to more closely consider the visual language of the film, but it also responds to what's happening, inside of the story and the experiences of the people.
In terms of what people can take away from watching and what you hope the impact of the film to be, because I guess this sort of can work on two levels. There's the sort of very immediate, like the threat of the wolves, and it's kind of a very tangible threat, but then you can also look at it as more metaphorical, this sort of threat of climate change, which often does feel very intangible, and that you can't kind of pinpoint exactly how it's going to manifest itself, which is something. So it's like both very specific, but there's also something much broader there being portrayed. So what do you hope people take away from it?
Yeah, it's a tricky question, because I think there's not one thing I want people to take away. In a way, I mean, I love nothing more than a multiplicity of readings. It's always funny for me when somebody puts up their hands and they're like, the ending, I could see that you were definitely trying for, that he was, and they kind of have a reading of the film that had never crossed my mind. I think this, way that it can open up these multiple readings is very exciting. And at the same time, it's sensory. I guess I'm hoping that people get taken into the sensory experience. There's a real simplicity to this story. At one hand, it kind of, what we were going for was this fable-like quality. And at the same time, something very real. It's beyond a fable. Our characters, they're not symbolic. They're very real. They're grounded in reality. But at the same time, it could be somewhere or anywhere, or, so to create this kind of fable quality. So in the end, my hope is that people stay inside of it, stay with it. The film, it kind of, we play with time. So we're not giving away anything too quickly, which is a very deliberate intention. And we're hoping to create this sensory experience that you feel like you've been there. And if you've been there, you feel the devastation in a way that you never could have in your imagination, I think we minimize these kind of ruptures, or somebody losing their animals or somebody losing their horse. It sounds very menial in a way, but if you feel it, if you really go through it, it leaves a different impression, a different mark. So my hope is that people would be open to feeling the very deep and profound emotions around that, and to, in a way, have that reflexivity to think about that in connection to themselves.
And just very quickly, what does it mean to you to have a film here at Marrakech Film Festival in front of this incredible jury, but also, how this festival is this incredible platform for this cultural exchange and giving a platform to the Marrakech Film Festival.
Yeah, it's unbelievable, really. There's not words to really capture. To have seen it with just this jury, where you have two of your favorite filmmakers that are watching it, and, sitting inside of this kind of cinema with an audience, this is a dream, to have huge audiences show up. Like, it's such a flourishing cinematic community here, but also just to be in the company of people that, really live and breathe cinema. I think this is the thing. It's not, when you come here, it doesn't feel like a dying art. No, this is flourishing. We're in this collective experience, and we're preferencing the art, we're preferencing art, and we're preferencing ideas of philosophy and cinema. This to me is so rich. So for me, this has been an absolute dream to be part of this. And there's so many more days to come as well.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for sharing all that with me. Congratulations on the film. Really enjoy your rest of your time here in Marrakech.
Thank you so much.